The British Empire was once the largest empire in history and a global superpower from around 1820 to 1956. Today its shores are slightly smaller than they used to be, and aside from 11 islands, 3 peninsulas and a large chunk of Antarctica, the British Empire is no more. Today, most former British Empire countries are part of the Commonwealth of Nations, which is sort of like a gentleman's club for the ex-empire. How did it end up like this? Well, until the 1860s, all Empire territories took direct rule from the British government in London. But in 1867, Canada was getting too big for the Colonial Office to administrate, along with all the other territories. The solution was to make Canada a self-governing country within the Empire. That is, the country would make its own parliament and laws, but constitutionally under the umbrella of the Empire. Australia and New Zealand would soon follow in a similar fashion in 1901 and 1907 respectively. In 1926, the British government declared that this was now the norm for all British territories, meaning that every country in the Empire was equal but united under the Crown. Although they could decide their own laws, these countries were only allowed to trade with each other and not external empires because the British government wanted to ensure all their colonies were profitable. In 1931, the more powerful empire nations like Canada, Australia and New Zealand officially broke away from this bloc and became independent states through the Statute of Westminster. These nations would be legally independent aside from things to do with their constitution and the monarchy, and despite complete legislative independence, they retained a close partnership with the empire. After the Second World War, the Empire was virtually bankrupt, and having ended their isolationist trade policy, more and more colonies became unprofitable as trade with the USA was preferable. In 1949, the British Empire as a legal entity was abolished, replaced by the Commonwealth of Nations. This allowed the new Republic of India to join the club and benefit from membership. From the 1950s to the 1980s, the British Empire Commonwealth eventually slid over to the Commonwealth of Nations. In the 1980s, Canada, Australia and New Zealand also eventually gained control of their own constitutions too, so that the British Parliament did not need to be consulted when any of these nations made changes to their constitutions. The last territory, Hong Kong, was ceded back to China in 1997. Today, the remaining parts of the British Empire are places that would be economically unfeasible to become independent and require subsidies from the UK, what they can't make up in trade. Aside from Atrikiri and Dhekelia, which only act as military bases, all of these populations have their own local assemblies to decide laws and taxation policy. Not all, but some of these countries still have the British monarch as their shared head of state. 3 countries, Ireland, the Maldives and Zimbabwe, have all left the Commonwealth for various reasons, but the Maldives and Zimbabwe have both reapplied to join. Generally, these countries help each other out after natural disasters or provide poverty relief, etc. And every 4 years we have our own mini-Olympics where each member nation and overseas territory can participate. There you have it, 53 nations joined by a common history, 16 of which share a monarch, with 14 territories still under direct British sovereignty.